We've got a caller by the name of Patrick, him out of Florida. And Patrick, you want to talk about the difference between agnosticism and atheism. You are on Talk Heathen this fine Sunday morning with Secularity and Johnny P. How are you doing?
Hey, doing great. I hope you guys are doing well.
Yeah. So tell us what the
But
difference is.
I was thinking about the distinction. I feel like, I like this pantheism. I've talked about it before, but I feel like I'm more agnostic. I like a few of the not necessarily religion, more philosophies and stuff like that on faith. But some of the religions, like Taoism, I think may be kind of plausible. But as an agnostic, I'm not sure. I'm a fence straddler, and I don't really go with atheists or theists so much, I feel. And maybe you could like clarify that for me if you think I'm more theist than atheist, but I feel like I'm more agnostic than either. And I feel like that's the default position, if there is a default position. And I wanted to talk to you guys about that because it seems like several atheists seem to think they have a quote default position, and I disagree to that personally.
When you use the term agnostic for yourself, Patrick, like when you say to other people, "Hey, I'm agnostic," like I'm an agnostic, I follow agnosticism. When you say that stuff, what does that mean to you? How are you using that term? Because that might be helpful for us.
I'm glad you asked that because in the definition of agnostic, I believe there's two definitions there. If you Google it, you could see it's separated by a semicolon, but a semicolon can be replaced with a period. And I think that's two different definitions in the definition of agnostic. One says one who doesn't believe anything can be known or is known about God. And that's not the kind of agnostic I would be. I would go by the second that's separated by a semicolon that says just one who has neither faith nor disbelief in God. I don't know that I necessarily have a faith in God. I think some gods are more plausible. I believe they're God guesses. Every religion, every faith, every philosophy, like the philosophy of pantheism, that's not a religion at all. But atheists call it a religion. Pantheism is clearly a philosophy that was created by Spinoza that Einstein liked. And I think that might be a plausible option. I'm not like an atheist, though, that would just hard reject any God claim and say, I just can't believe, I disbelieve in any possibility of God. I think that's what a lot of atheists are saying. Maybe not.
Patrick, I'm gonna dial you back a little bit, and we're gonna dial back in afterwards because we've covered a lot of ground here, and that's great. But I don't want to sprinkle a little bit. I want to dig in a little bit. So you said one thing you said that stood out to me is like some gods are more plausible than others. Okay, that's great. Can you give me an example of one of those gods that's more plausible, a god that's less plausible, and can you explain why that more plausible god is more plausible, and vice versa?
Okay, that's easy. You think about Christianity, it depicts a hypocritical God that contradicts itself. To me, that could be easily tossed out because, a benevolent God wouldn't destroy entire cities and civilizations, right? That wouldn't be benevolent at all. So you could toss that God out with the rubbish real quick, I would say.
Could you, though?
For example.
Well, Patrick, could you? Because if this world that we live in is a temporary place, a staging ground, a bus station, or something like that, as some Christians and other theists would believe, then what happens here isn't necessarily all that important. What really is important is the bigger picture, the eternal life that exists. And supposing in a particular mythology, you've got a community of people who are either haven't satisfied the preconditions for hell or heaven, and they're heading there. God can see that they're heading toward hell because they're, they do all the things that that God doesn't like. What if that God sent a tsunami to wipe them all out before they satisfy one of those preconditions, and that God says to itself, well, better that they go to limbo or purgatory than to go to hell. So I'm just going to kill them all now. And that way they can spend, I don't know, a couple of eons in purgatory or limbo, get purified, and then make their way up to heaven. What about that kind of a Yahweh God?
Are you saying that this would be purgatory earth, and then like based off our actions here? I'm not sure. Yeah, I'm not.
Well,
I don't
if I
know
can,
about that.
yeah.
I'm not.
if I can try, Patrick, and just kind of say what Johnny was just saying just a little bit differently, and of course, Johnny, tell me if I'm wrong, but
Sexplain it, please.
it sounds like what he's offering is this concept of morally sufficient reasons. So because we as humans are so limited in understanding the totality of the universe, whatever the hell that is, if there really is a God, if there really is this, all powerful, supernatural, divine being, well, it seems at least possible that God knows about bad things that are going to happen later on. And maybe there's a bad thing now that, okay, this sucks, but if we do this bad thing now, instead of waiting to that worst thing, that actually works out better. And generally that concept is called morally sufficient reasons. And it just, kind of pushes it back just a little bit in that sense. It's like, well, it seems bad to us. This seems like a terrible thing, but what if God knows more than us? And of course, God knows more than us because by definition, right? Does that make sense?
That's where I was going.
Sounds like kind of like putting a cart before the horse or something.
Oh,
like
I don't like the argument either, Patrick. Neither does Johnny. Neither of us like it. But what is a sufficient response to that other than just saying you haven't met a burden of proof to begin with, basically?
Yeah.
I think that would be sufficient to say you haven't met a burden of proof. But I let's get to that now on the burden of proof. Has the atheist made any claims? I think you guys have made some claims. You claim no evidence of God exists. Dillahunty claimed no.
There's that name again. There's that name again.
Who is that guy?
If I have to hear the name Dillahunty one more time. Look, but
my bad. I didn't mean
Patrick.
What y'all got into it or something, huh?
Yeah, maybe. He's better at me at Valorant than I'll ever be. But no, but Patrick, what claims? Let me tell you my position on this, and maybe this is secularity as well. He might have a stronger position on this than I do. I'll tell you what mine is. I have not met sufficient evidence to establish a faith condition in my head. I haven't seen enough evidence to believe that a God or pixies or flying camels exist. Okay? I haven't. My claim is that I haven't seen enough evidence to convince me. Now, it's easy to prove. You ask me, have you seen enough evidence to convince you? And I respond, no. So now either I'm accurately representing my that claim that I have not seen enough evidence that I recognize to believe in God, or I'm lying to you. So I mean, I don't know where we go from there. That's my claim. I'm not saying Yahweh doesn't exist. I pretty much think that Yahweh is a fiction, but I can't prove it, so I'm not saying it because I don't want the burden of proving it. That might be cowardly, but I think it's the smart move. I can't see through all of time and all of space. I can't see through all of dimensions. I am a limited being, an ugly bag of mostly water. And so rather than make cosmic claims with my limited consciousness and my limited sensory apparatus, I'm just going to say I'm not convinced. There's my claim. So what is thy response to that?
I don't know what would be evidence of God. That's what I'm trying to figure out.
That's yeah, I think
That's-
honestly, Patrick, that's a really, really good thought that you're thinking about. I mean, just like Johnny mentioned pixies and flying camels and stuff, like it just really seems to be the case on all of these things that the idea of what this evidence would be to prove this is so far outside our understanding that isn't making the claim or argument that it absolutely categorically cannot. It's just to say currently it seems as if there's so much junk we got to get through before we can ever really start to accept this claim. And I mean, the fact that you said that just kind of right off the rip like that, Patrick. I mean, I'm with you there. I don't exactly know what that would be, and that's the problem. And basically everything Johnny
So
said, I
how
go
can
just
you
a
ask for evidence? How can
well,
you
so
ask for evidence when you
so the
don't know
issue
what evidence would be?
Yeah,
Good
so
question.
I don't know what evidence is necessary off the top of my head, let's say, to prove proteins, a certain protein does a certain function in the human body, right? I don't know that off the top of my head, but that doesn't mean that we can't discover things, right? It doesn't mean that we can't figure things out more about the body and anatomy, right? So even
That's
though
what
I
I'm
don't
saying.
have
How do we know? Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
no, it's okay. It's okay. It's just it
I
the
was going to
fact
say,
yeah, go ahead.
how would we determine, if we have no way to determine what evidence of God
Mhm.
is, how do we know evidence of God doesn't already exist? We just don't know what we're looking at.
Great question. I'm not making the claim that no evidence exists. I just haven't seen it. And although I don't know what it would be, if I knew what it would be, I would
How
go
do you
seek it
know
out.
you haven't seen it? No, wait. How do you
Okay,
know you haven't seen
Patrick,
it?
hang on. Patrick, listen. If evidence is brought to either myself or Johnny, and just like you mentioned earlier about various gods that you think are less plausible due to obvious logical contradictions, if evidence is brought that has one of those obvious logical contradictions, done. We don't need to go any further on it. And every single time I
Then
personally
why
have
keep
ever been
debating?
presented with
Why keep
evidence, hang
debating
on a second,
Christians?
man. I don't want to mute you, but hang on
Oh,
a second. Every single time that I have ever been presented with evidence, it has failed in one of those means, whether it's a fallacy or whether it just doesn't actually prove the thing that people think it does. And so that's kind of where we're at, is that okay, maybe we don't have the exact box that says once this is checked, we've now proven God, but that really isn't the issue. The issue is that when presented with the evidence that people say does check that box, there are obvious reasons to reject those claims.
yeah. It's always crummy evidence,
Right.
Patrick. But what was your question? Because I
The
think,
thing is, if you don't know what evidence is, you may have been presented evidence. You just didn't realize that was what God is.
Not if it
God could
failed
be the
because of one of those logical
electromagnetic
contradictions,
spectrum.
though.
We don't know.
No, just like you mentioned earlier about less plausible gods, you said there are logical contradictions with the Christian God.
yeah.
I agree with you.
hmm
And that doesn't then count as evidence, right? Like, how would we know? Oh, well, it doesn't matter. We've already shown that there is a problem here with this argument.
Yeah. And Patrick, if I might just add,
Has
Patrick, if
any
I might just
God
add, if I you got to you got to delay. I'm going to mute you. This is a respectful mute. This is not a red card mute. All right. Um, but with all due respect, and I hope that it's going both ways here. If Secularity and SR and I decide get some evidence that somebody says, this is it. This is the evidence that you need. We're going to look at the evidence. We and most of the people who do this kind of stuff and think about this stuff, real people with YouTube shows and people without YouTube shows. We get the evidence, we consider it, we mull it over, we ruminate, and then we either are persuaded or not. And a person could say, well, the person hearing the evidence is dishonest. They know in their heart that a God exists. Well, you can go fuck yourself, because I don't know in my heart anything that I don't affirm, right? I struggle with certain things, but I don't know, and I am in a state of denial. I might not, that person's not intelligent enough to accept the evidence. Well, maybe I'm not intelligent enough. Perfectly fine. And yet the fact is true. I'm not persuaded. I've heard a lot of arguments. I've watched a lot of YouTube with this stuff. I've read books, believe it or not, on the subject, and none of it is particularly convincing. Everything's got a hole, or it's, well, I don't know what the hell that person was experiencing, but that doesn't seem likely. And so, um, is it possible that something slipped through my filters? Yeah, but I don't think so. And I'm always thinking about this stuff. So I'm unmuting you again. All due respect. Continue, Patrick.
I really appreciate you guys. What I really, I gotta say, I really love the pushback from the atheists. But from my perspective, I think it's just a little bit of an overcorrection. I think that it's a hard rejection of God in a lot of cases, like an anti-theist or something. That's more of an extreme stance than probably what you all guys take. But
yeah, I'll buy that.
I gotta say that I agree. I think I'm like maybe like 70 or 80% atheist in some ways, but as a more agnostic, I think the evidence is coming in, and I'd say give science a time. I don't think we have the God technology or any God hypothesis has been presented to science. And really, to say there's no evidence of a thing and it hasn't even been presented to science, then I think that's kind of a rigged game.
The game was rigged from the start. Patrick, my last thought, and I'm going to kick it over to SR, but whenever discrete claims have been made about supernatural phenomenon or claimed supernatural phenomenon, at no point in history has it been established that it was a supernatural thing. It's usually a glitch in the recording equipment, or some psychological phenomenon that's taking place, or a coincidence, or it's an inarticulable mess, what the person has just said. I'm not saying that we're not going to be in the year 2525 and there's not going to be some new kind of scanning device, some new sensor that can detect auras and fairies and stuff. What I think what SR and I are saying is that until that time that we have measurable, demonstrable, repeatable, testable, unexplainable phenomenon, whatever the heck that means, we're just going to be like, well, I'm just not convinced that magic is the answer. Okay, it could be, but I'm not convinced that it is. So I'm just going to hold judgment in advance and just go about my business like the material world and the measurable energies and such is all there is. And I've got to be responsible to my neighbors and my friends and my own conscience. So, SR, what's your final thought?
Yeah, I mean, first off, I can echo all of that, Patrick. I mean, Johnny and I are on the exact same page there. The only other thing I wanted to make sure to bullet point right before the end is just remember how we started this call, where you said, "Hey, there are these two definitions of agnosticism," and they kind of are in the same ballpark, but they definitely don't exactly mean the same thing. Well, that's true for a lot of this stuff, right? And atheist is definitely another one of those words that has a couple of different meanings. And depending on which definition you're using in a conversation, maybe it's not as strong of a stance as you think, right? Like if I said, "Hey, do you believe that there's a bunch of Sasquatches running around?" and you say, "No." Well, okay. That's kind of the same thing a lot of times when somebody says, "Hey, man, do you believe in God?" I go, "Well, no." I'm not saying categorically it isn't there. But again, that those different definitions really are important. And it's honestly, you're on the right track, in my opinion, Patrick. I think you and I have spoken before, and it just sounds like you're questioning and you're really trying to be open, and that's the way to do this. If Johnny and I are presented with good evidence, we will accept it. The problem is we are unconvinced by any of it currently. Now we're going to keep looking, but until that time comes, we can both be in at least that soft stance of, hey, I don't currently accept this. I don't accept this claim. But again, seriously, Patrick, thank you for calling us, because I think these types of conversations where we're just like working stuff out with each other and there's no goal or winning or anything. I mean, Johnny
Yeah.
already won earlier. He's got the awards coming in the mail, but
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And I'll tell you what, those awards are they're a double-edged sword because you don't just want to put them on a shelf
right,
unframed,
right.
right?
I know. It's a
You got to
lot of work.
level them up. I got so many of them, tremendous amount.